The calendar is fascinating. Ireland moved very quickly, and some other countries. By February the 14th of 2024, by Valentine's Day 2024, Ireland and other countries were describing Israel's offensives in the strongest possible terms. I think they may even have been using the word genocide by then. And some of us were very reluctant to do so. Some of us felt, and continue to feel, that it was perfectly reasonable for Israel to respond in the most severe of manners to that terrorist atrocity of October the 7th, in which about 1,200 people were killed and 251 taken hostage. There's a moment where the numbers become irresistible, isn't there? There's a moment where the horror and the heartbreak you feel at the killing of those 1,200 people has to in some way reflect or account for the feelings you have when I remind you that nearly 65,000 people have now been killed in Israeli attacks on Gaza, the majority of whom have been women and children. Nick had that unicorn caller today. I don't know if you heard it. Nick had that unicorn caller who is still claiming that Israel has done everything within its power to minimise civilian casualties. 65,000 dead.
Israel tries everything they can to try and minimise death.
Impossible at the moment to identify precisely what proportion of that is civilians, but it will be the massive percentage. And you've still got people claiming that Israel has done everything it can to minimise civilian casualties. So you're left with two conclusions. It's either that is the biggest load of nonsense you've ever heard since the last time Benjamin Netanyahu opened his mouth on this subject, or the Israeli Defence Force is quite spectacularly incompetent. We have tried our very hardest to not to kill civilians, but we've killed tens of thousands of women and children. So tell me again how hard you've tried? Good grief. And again, it's only one caller to a radio station and possibly not someone that would ring me anymore, but to be still clinging to that no nonsense, that idea is, if the stakes if the death toll wasn't so high, it would be heartbreaking that anybody could remain so deluded. But of course, it is that delusion that has contributed to this death toll. And again, inevitably, the evidence that the United Nations Commission has considered, which cites heavily the comments made by Israeli leaders, is being described by an Israeli Foreign Ministry spokesperson as Hamas proxies and relying entirely on Hamas falsehoods laundered and repeated by others. Moments at which you realised where this was all going. Is that a phone-in, do you think? It's a bit too vague, isn't it? It's a bit too subtle. But I'll tell you one for me, and I'm not going to apologise for not spotting this even sooner. But when Israel started claiming that all of the information coming out of Gaza couldn't be trusted because Hamas were in charge of so much of the infrastructure, and simultaneously they wouldn't let independent journalists from organisations like this or the BBC or ITN or Channel 4 News into Gaza, you realise that there was a pretty obvious scam going on. You can't trust any of the information coming out of that area except the information we give you, and you're not allowed to send anyone in to check for themselves. So if you were to be marking the milestones of misery that have led to this conclusion of genocide, that would probably be a big one, right? Disproportionality would probably be a big one. It is absolutely right that Israel responds. Absolutely right. But there will come a point when it's disproportionate. And that point got passed a long time ago, but there will never be consensus on when. There'll never be unanimous agreement on when that point got passed. And that is among people who know that the point has been passed, never mind the people still clinging to the lie that it hasn't, to the nonsense that Israel has done everything in its power to minimise civilian casualties. And now it launches a ground offensive in Gaza. Nobody's even pretending anymore that this has anything to do with hostages, except, of course, the terminally deluded. And I mean, it's almost impossible in 2025, in an information-rich world, to get your head around the successful pincer movement of banning journalism and also claiming a monopoly on information coming out. So let's look at four of the things that have led the Commission to reach its conclusion that Israeli authorities and Israeli forces have committed 4 of the 5 acts of genocide defined under the 1948 Genocide Convention against a national, ethnic, racial or religious group, in this case Palestinians in Gaza. And remember, this follows a plurality of international genocide scholars not only arriving at the same conclusion but also explaining and showing their working in extraordinary detail. Killing members of the group through attacks on protected objects, targeting civilians and other protected persons, the deliberate infliction of conditions causing deaths. It is inarguable that that is what has happened, whether through famine, whether through attacks on hospitals, whether through attacks upon people queuing for food, whatever it may be. It is absolutely inarguable that that has happened, and therefore the conclusion that an act of genocide has been committed was perhaps inevitable. Point 2, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group through direct attack on civilians and protected objects, severe mistreatment of detainees, forced displacement and environmental destruction. Another milestone when they told people who'd already been displaced, whose homes had already been blown up and who were sheltering in tents in hideous conditions, that they had to move again. And you sort of think, what purpose does that possibly serve? Point 3, deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of the group in whole or in part, through destruction of structures and land essential to Palestinians, destruction and denial of access to medical services, forced displacement, blocking essential aid, water, electricity and fuel from reaching Palestinians, reproductive violence, and specific conditions impacting children. Specific conditions impacting children. And on it goes, imposing measures intended to prevent births. This is crucial because when the wasteland that remains is repopulated, who is it going to be repopulated by? Through the December 2023 attack on Gaza's largest fertility clinic, where an estimated 4,000 embryos, 1,000 sperm samples and unfertilized eggs were destroyed. Did you even know that? To fulfill the legal definition of genocide under the Genocide Convention, it must also be established that the perpetrator committed any one of those acts with specific intent to destroy the group in whole or in part. And there you find that the actual words of President Isaac Herzog, who was here last week, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant have incited the commission of genocide. Genocidal intent, and I quote, was the only reasonable inference that could be concluded from the pattern of conduct of Israeli authorities and security forces in Gaza. And there are 2 responses. There are 3 responses to this. One is, may God have mercy on all their souls, but we've known this for some time. The second possible response is, good grief, I can't believe it's taken today for me to realise the full extent of what has gone on. And the third response is lies, 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 lies. Anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism. Hamas propaganda, Hamas propaganda, Hamas propaganda. Close eyes, put fingers in ears, and try desperately never to think of the tens of thousands of dead children, the 64,905 people killed, of whom you can argue some deserve to die. But the mistake that they made, of course, was by allowing the idea to be articulated that they all deserve to die. And it's members of the Israeli administration that have done that. So despite managing to control everything, to silence dissent almost everywhere in the English-speaking world, to ban journalists, objective, honest journalists, from getting into the strip so that there could be actual, reliable reportage coming out. And don't even remind me to remind you how many journalists have been killed working for organisations like Al Jazeera and others who had people on the ground already, managing to shut down communication, shut down aid, shut down dissent, shut down discourse, shut down honest reporting, shut down anybody really minded to tell the truth about what has been going on. And crucially, they couldn't even hold that line without letting the words that demonstrate genocidal intent slip out to the delight of the baying supporters. And there we are. There we are. 4 out of 5 criteria for genocide reached, breached, and broken by Israel, killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of the group. And in some ways, despite the fact that this is potential life rather than life, but imposing measures intended to prevent births is the most dystopian of all, isn't it? Important to get all the details out there. Also important, given the reason why we spend time together every morning, to actually turn it into a question that can be answered by people phoning the programme. And I haven't done that yet, and it's already nearly 20 past, so bear with me. But I think the question is this. What has Benjamin Netanyahu... And listen, I will remind you of how many journalists have been killed, how many aid workers, how many children, how many babies, how many doctors. But don't think for a moment that the key figure here, the key statistic, the key demographic is the dead. But I do want to talk about what Benjamin Netanyahu has done to Israel. What has he done to Israel? He's turned Israel into a genocidal state, as adjudged by pretty much or one of the most august international bodies charged with policing that word, charged with establishing that criteria. I saw well, that's the question, and it may turn out that I've got a lot more to say to you, but goodness knows this is a subject that I'm so proud, actually, of how we've managed to conduct ourselves in this space since that horrible day in 2023. I'm so grateful to you for holding my hand as we've tried to walk a tightrope of accusation and abuse on one hand, and of gratitude and accusation and abuse from both, quote, sides. Don't make any mistake about that. People furious about how I described the Hamas attack in the first place and the necessity of Israel's robust response, and then people slowly getting more furious about my critique of the increasing hideousness of Israel's robust response. But I've been doing this job a long time now, and I've learnt to trust you, and I've learnt who to trust. And we've got this absolutely right. The only criticism I'd accept is that we might have been a little bit late going to the word genocide. But I would stand by that today as well, actually, because you need to have the support of a plurality of international scholars and now the United Nations Commission of Inquiry. And yes, there will be people calling me anti-Semitic. They can never call me a liar, but they can call me anti-Semitic, and that's fine. I can live with that. And that is the delusion. That is all that's left now, is that it can't be genocide because I say so. I don't know what Netanyahu's done to them. It's horrible to witness, including members of the UK media. Absolutely horrible to witness people who were not like this 5 years ago or even 3 years ago now becoming genocide apologists in public on the payroll of some of the major media organisations in this country. But the bigger picture, what has Benjamin Netanyahu done to Israel? We know what he's done to Gaza. It's called genocide.